Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all present today. Welcome to the first round of English Debate Competition InterVarsity Science e-Debate Challenge 2021. The motion for this debate is, in light of the short film Save Rolf, this house regret the use of animals in scientific research. I will be the chairperson and the timekeeper for room 3. Let me now introduce the debaters to you. Acting as the government team for this debate is the team from sorry, KUPTM Group B with Mr. Muhammad Hassan as the Prime Minister, Mr. Muhammad Isec as the Deputy Prime Minister, and Ms. Verlin Dear Tingham as the government whip. Acting as the opposition team for this debate is the team from with Ms. Catherine Alicia Nathan as the opposition leader, Mr. Danish Ram Agawal as the second opposition speakers, Mr. Kuhan Kartikin as the opposition whip. Our panel of adjudicators consists of Mr. Tariq Asfar bin Makatab, Ms. Audrey Kang Nyen T, Ms. Nurul Najwa binti Zulkafli. So before we begin, I'll briefly explain the rules. First, sensitive issues related to religion, racism, and touching a person's personality are prohibited. The use of Quranic verse and hadith to strengthen arguments is strictly prohibited. Each debater may speak for 7 minutes. The reply speech is 4 minutes. Time will begin to count as the debater begins to speak. The bell will be rung once at the end of the first minute to indicate that POIs are allowed to be asked by the opposition bench. Meanwhile, at the end of the 6 minutes, the bell will rung once to indicate the time allocated for POIs has ended. The bell will be rung twice at the end of 7 minutes to indicate the debater's time has expired. For reply speech, both teams will be given 1 minute as preparation time before making their respective reply speeches. As the third minute of reply speech, the bell will be rung once. In the fourth minute, the bell will be rung twice to indicate the time for the reply speech has ended. While the debaters is speaking, the opposition team can apply POIs in the form of questions, statements, facts, explanation, and also corrections. The opposition team are allowed to turn on the microphone on or raise your hands or papers to alert the speakers for POIs. No POIs are allowed during the reply speech. If the debaters lose internet connection during the debate, the debaters are given 10 minutes to return to the debate session. When the debaters successfully return to the debate session, the debater can continue the debate where they stop and there are no deduction of marks. If the debater is unable to enter the room after 10 minutes, the next debater from the opposition team will continue the debate session. Debaters are reminded to ensure internet access is available and in good condition for the smooth running of the debate session. Victory will be awarded to the team that gets majority votes from the panel of adjudicators. The decision of the panel of adjudicators is final. Now, we come to our debate. To open the case from the government team, I call upon the Prime Minister to start the debate session.
Can I just ask again, who's speaking in what order for government?
Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and
their names.
government.
Their names.
Muhammad Hassan as the Prime Minister, Muhammad Isec as Deputy Prime Minister, and Verlin Dear Tingham as the government whip.
Okay.
So, Prime Minister, you may start the debate.
Test, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ralph, the short film, has created wave of rage and awareness to the people around the world about the cruelty of the animal use in research. So today I, with the heavy heart, want to propose a motion in this house titled "In light of the short film Save Ralph, this house regret the use of animals in scientific research." Good evening to our honorable adjudicator from the affirmative side, ladies and gentlemen, that present here today. As the affirmative side of the house, we strongly regret the use of animals in scientific research. As the first speaker of the government side today, I will be defining the terms of the motion. Firstly is the term "in light of the short film Save Ralph." So, ladies and gentlemen, the short film Save Ralph referred to a short film about a rabbit named Ralph who has to witness and undergone a process where his life is used as a testing product to human, and how it emphasized the sadness, anger, and sorrow of Ralph on the damage that caused to his body by this scientific test. That is for the inlight of the short film Save Ralph. Next is the use of animals in scientific research. So, Mr. And ladies and gentlemen, in making scientific research to produce a drug, medicine, cosmetics, or many more for human consumption and usage, animals are often exploited to be test subject to determine the effectiveness, risks, and damage from the particular research. In this process, however, the animal have to endure suffering and damage inflicted on them, often resulted in death. So, Mr. Speaker, seeing this kind of thing happen to our animals, we as a government side regret this animal cruelty in scientific research just to satisfy human selfish desire and greediness. Where we will structure our case as follow. I, as the first speaker, will present to you the first argument under ineffectiveness use of animal testing, while our second speaker will present two arguments to you about unethical use of animal and market demand. And our third speaker will cross-check the opposition side and deconstruct their case so the House can clearly see why today's motion should be accepted. Mr. Speaker, the burden of the proof that should be carried by the opposition is the opposition should prove to the House why they are not regretting the use of animal in scientific research and why we should continue this animal testing. So, Mr. Speaker, before moving to our first argument from the government side, any POI from the opposition? If there are none, let's move to our argument ineffectiveness of animal testing. So as we all know, that most of the scientific research use animal as first stage of scientific trial. So most of people believe that this trial is significant for the outcome of the research. They say, for the example, if we want to test an effectiveness of a drug for the human consumption, we must test it first for animal and see if it's effective for animal, we can safely say it is effective for human consumption too. However, actually, this stage of animal use in scientific research is ineffective and often no added value to the research and make it waste of the resource for the research. For example, in the making of human immunodeficiency virus vaccine, the animal does not have HIV like human. So how can we get added value from animal who didn't suffer the condition like the human itself, where the human can suffer or have HIV? Therefore, we can test whether the vaccine is suitable or not, but in the animal world, they have no HIV. So how can we test the HIV vaccine to the animal? This, in the end of the day, will just make the animals only suffer, but the research will not yield anything significant. Imagine the burn flow in their body as their eyes hopefully looking forward to his own life, but taken by selfish human just because the human have mind and can exploit the animal. Another example, 90 from 100 drugs tested on animal that have been proven efficient on animal, however, have no efficiency when it was given to the human. It shows full efficiency on animal, but no efficient on human when being used. So imagine how much of the resource wasted for doing this research again and again and again to fulfill human selfish needs and desires. How many of these animals have to be sacrificed again just to make something perfect for human usage and consumption? This is the message and the tone underlying short film Self-Rough that realistically captured how hard it is to be animal subjected to research and die from it. So seeing how this ineffective use of animal in the scientific research and the waste of resource in using them as the research as the test subject, we as a government regret the use of animal in scientific research, and I hope this motion will be accepted for the love of the animal. I rest my case.
Thank you for that speech. To open the case from the opposition team, I call upon the leader of opposition to continue the debate session.
For POI, could you just please put it in the chat and I will, because I have it open so I can just see and get to it. Thank you. All right. Here's how I'm going to structure my speech. I'm first going to rebut the argument that came out from the speaker before me, which is in regards to the ineffectiveness of animal testing as a whole. Then I'm going to tell you important clarifications that should be made in this debate that wasn't really existent in the speech before me. For example, what happens in status quo and why do we use specific animals in terms of animal testing? Then on to my principal argument as to why the hierarchy of humans and animals are to be respected here, why animal testing in of itself is necessary, and in the worst case, even if animal testing is inhumane and causes pain to animals, why do we think it's still necessary for us to use? But first, the rebuttals. The speaker before me talked about ineffectiveness and how animal testing is shouldn't be used because it doesn't produce like the end result that they want to. I think this relies on the idea that animal testing is the final stage of scientific research, which is just not true, right? Animal testing is used to ensure that this can be used on human testing, which is then what determines if this product is able to be consumed or not for the market. So we think this is, in general, what animal testing is used for. But even if the problem that exists in the speech before me still exists, right? Like, for example, that we have to keep continuous testing on these animals, have to do it over and over again. We think this is fine because this adheres to the principle of scientific process, which is trial and error. We think at the end of the day, trial and error is necessary, even if it's for testing on animals or testing on humans, because at the end of the day, the most important product that we get from animal testing in scientific research is medicines, vaccines, things that can be used to help humans. At the end of the day, we think this is completely fine. The second layer was then to tell us that because animals don't suffer the same diseases as us, it shouldn't be used. And they use HIV as an example. I think the reason why we don't have a cure for HIV is simply because animals don't contract HIV. We think other diseases that we've made breakthroughs in, for example, diseases like cancer, which we're able to test on animals and then use on human testing and then produce breakthroughs in the scientific field. It's exactly why animal testing is completely necessary. Moving on to the substantive part of my speech. Firstly, I'm going to tell you and contextualize the film in of itself, because I think the speaker before me tried to paint it in a way that is to be taken as truth. But at the end of the day, the film Save Ralph is at best an exaggerated story, and it's not an accurate depiction of what animals go through in the modern era in regards to animal testing. And I think this is completely fine, because at the end of the day, this film needs to capture the attention of its audience, right? But at the end of the day, this film is a dramatic indication or a depiction of what happens in animal testing. I'm now going to contextualize this debate and tell you what actually happens in status quo. Firstly, we think only legitimate companies are able to use animal testing, and this only happens after processes that these companies have to undertake to make sure that these chemical products are able to minimize the risk on animals. So we don't just simply test on animals. Secondly, we think this process is heavily regulated by governments, and governments only ensure that certain types of animals, for example, mice or rabbits, are used in animal testing. Thirdly, these companies that engage in animal testing are heavily audited by the government. So there are checks by government officials to ensure that the environments in these companies are clean, safe, and effective for animal testing. So it's not in the complete condition of depravity as the speaker before me tried to depict animal testing is. Thirdly, what animals do we use? And I think this is extremely important because it takes out a lot of the gravity of the speech before me. I think most of the animals that we use for animal testing is rabbit and mice. And we use this for three reasons. Firstly, these animals are most similar to human DNA, where we share a high percentage of similarity. Secondly, they're susceptible to the same type of diseases, for example, malaria and cancer. This is what I talked about earlier and why it's extremely important. And thirdly, these animals are extremely easy to control because we're able to observe their reactions in a controlled environment. At the end of the day, we are never using animals that are protected, for example, primates or endangered animals. We only use certain types of animals that are considered pests, for example, mice. These are the types of animals that we use in animal testing. Moving on to whether animal testing is humane or inhumane or not. We think at the end of the day, this testing occurs in a very controlled and regulated method because at the end of the day, this testing must be able to ensure that we're able to use it on humans. And so we don't use extreme methods like sawing off limbs and stuff like that. We keep these animals in good environments, and when this testing is over, if the animals are still alive, we release them back into the ecosystem. Onto the principal argument and why do we think the hierarchy of animals and humans is important here. We think throughout the period of time, there's a hierarchy of prey and predator in respect to the ecosystem and the interactions between species. Humans are a part of this hierarchy, and I dare say we are almost at the top of this hierarchy, right? We think the animals that we use for testing are mostly pests or animals that are used or controlled in other environments, for example, farms. And when these animals pose a problem to us, we assert our right to control this population. And I think this is the inherent privilege that humans are given in regards to their status in the hierarchy and our control over animals. This is akin to other methods like population control, where farmers release owls into like farms and stuff to get rid of mice or snakes. These are the same principles that we use to ensure that to assert our right over animals if it means that we are able to benefit off of them. This is important because we, at the end of the day, do not apply this same principle to protected species of animals, but only animals which are in large quantities and are similar to us at the end of the day. Second argument, why is animal testing completely necessary? I'm going to talk about the purpose of animal testing, which is mostly used for biological products such as medicine or cosmetics, right? We think at the end of the day, these type of chemical substances have a high potential of adverse effects, but it is important in areas of science which uplifts human survival. For example, improving our standard of living by curing diseases or improving our responses to diseases like making vaccines. There must be a process of trial and error to ensure that these medicines are able to be used for people, right? At the end of the day, we always value human lives over animal lives, and we should not allow human trials unless there's evidence to prove that it is safe for animals to use, right? Impacts. We think firstly, we're able to speed up the process of manufacturing because without this, we have to only rely on predictions and theoretical models, which are never enough of a guarantee to ensure that it is safe to use on humans. But also secondly, we minimize the risk of human fatality, which is an important principle in scientific research because even with animal testing, we may still produce adverse effects with the risk of failure. And this is a risk that we are not willing to take on the side of opposition. In the worst case, even if animal testing is sort of inhumane and causes pain to animals, we think this is a trade-off we are willing to make because government has to defend a world in which humans are then subjected to these products.
I would like to thank the speaker for the speech. To continue our debate, I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case from their side.
Test, test. Can you hear me? All right, and gentlemen, I would love to start a war of white with you, with the opposition leader, but I see that you are unwarm. But before that, thank you, Mr. Speaker, government, opposition, and all members of the House that participate in this today's debate. Before I'm going further to provide 2 points in strengthening our government case, let me see and invite you guys to see what are the big mistakes that happen from their side. Firstly, like when the opposition leader mentioned that they want to ensure that it can be used in human. So it is regarding the principle, it is regarding the quality of the product itself. But at the end of the day, in today's debate, they are never providing us the different in terms of regarding the animal scientific research mechanism, and also the other alternative that we could use in enhancing the quality of the product, or maybe to follow the principle that have been set and they have been mentioned in this debate. Because another alternative that can be used beside apart from the animal testing, we still have the such as the clinical trial alternative. We have the human cell testing alternative to in order to have a good quality product, and also to reach the principle in terms of to have a QA tester before producing the product. So by at the end of the day, disregarding the alternative, these alternative we are affecting others' life, because by using this animal scientific research, or can be known as animal testing, mentioned in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen, we could see clearly that we are neglecting a life in order to reach a better quality, whereby we have the other alternatives such as the clinical trial, human cell testing, and all. So why we shouldn't utilize all this method in order to reach a better quality product? That is never clarified in their opposition side. And then regarding the second point that they are bringing up in today's debate is regarding the animals that have been used, is such a rabbit, mice, and all. Yes, you say that they are similar to humans. They could we could have the end effectiveness in terms of the end of the product itself. But how about this life that have been neglected? Because yes, you can say that it will be suitable in terms of regarding we to produce a medicine, and it is suitable for us to reach a vaccine and all. But how about that this kind of animal that have been used in order to produce a cosmetic product? Is it cosmetic product if is one of the most our needs in our daily life? In order for you to in order to fulfill our needs, in order to fulfill our wants, we just sacrificing without thinking the life that have been suffered in order for us to have our own, by neglecting their rights as a life being in our world, ladies and gentlemen. And then regarding their second points, which is I would say this is ridiculous in today's debate, is that regarding the purpose of animal testing, because or just because just because we want to value our human life rather than human, we just neglecting their right to exist in our world. Because at the end of the day, in today's debate, we would like to reach is either regret or not. It is not the matter of the product that we would like to achieve in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. Because when we talk about the purpose of animal testing, whereby you mentioned that we want to value our human life rather than human, it is a bad morality that you want to persuade in today's debate. Because are the life of animal is not important in today's world? Are they not even have their own right to exist in our world? It's just a matter of it's just a matter of to fulfill our needs, or so we just neglecting their right as a living mechanism or living organism in our world. So we just really need to forget about them, ladies and gentlemen. So without further ado, regarding I already mentioning what are the mistakes that happen from their sides. Let me simply explain the second point in this from our government side. So the second point is regarding the unethical, ladies and gentlemen. So as if in humanities, we couldn't deny that we have our own capability. We have our own alternative in protecting ourselves from danger, such as example that we could reach we could reach and asking from those who have authorities such as police, hospital. Even we have a law to protect in order to protecting ourselves. But compared to animals, ladies and gentlemen, yes, they are not. Maybe they are not even the same as human. But in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, they could feel this pain. They also can suffer with all the scientific process that they need to undergo, ladies and gentlemen, because this can be clearly seen through the rough story, how suffering they are. So we as a human being, the one who
P1.
think rationally, do you feel that this animal scientific, or can be known as this animal testing, killing those defenseless organism or those defenseless life is not necessary for us to think about them? So before I going further, yes.
Animals are kept in farms where they continued breeding, and oftentimes, like conditions worse than in animal testing, where oftentimes they're kept in cages, but it's important for food source. Do you think this is something that's to regret?
Ladies and gentlemen, yes, maybe you will say that it is important for regarding the food and necessary. But how about how about all this life that have been killing, all this life that have been neglected in order for us to have the cosmetic product? How about this kind of matters that we are neglecting for? So, for instance, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of protecting the wildlife, wildlife of animal, whereby we have the poaching law, whereby we in the United States we have the poaching law in order to protecting the wildlife. So why can we just have another alternative, or why can we just simply humanities in terms of thinking that the right of the animal by regretting this today's motion? And then moving on to the market demand, ladies and gentlemen, but whereby when we are not even regretting or simply rejecting our today's motion, there are statistics published by the PETA, which is the people for the ethical treatment of animal, whereby they are mentioning more than 100 million animals are tested and killed every year just to fulfill that just to fulfill the global domestic marketing that have been increasing 5% every year, like a skincare, hair care, makeup, perfume, and all. So are you thinking that this kind of wants that are you want to sacrifice all the rights of animals that have been existed in our world? So regarding the matter of life, regarding the matters of empathy towards those life that have their own right to exist in this world, so this motion need to be rejected and this motion need to be accepted, and that I raise my case. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their remarks. Now, I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the case for their side.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Okay.
you are.
Okay, thank you. For POIs, I have no particular preference. You can place it in the chat or you can just unmute. Okay. I think the biggest problem with government is that they are applying standard principles without recognizing context. This debate isn't about whether one side values animal life or not. This debate is about weighing the difference and the necessary use of certain types of animals in respect to improving the human condition. Of course, on side opposition, we regret that there are casualties in the lives of rabbits and mice, but that does not mean that we are a team that neglects the rights of animals. We have already shown that we are the side that supports safer testing procedures, or we support protected species' right to exist because of the fact that they have valuable contributions to the ecosystem and habitat that is necessary to the continued existence of human survival. These are types of animals in which their right to exist continues in tandem with human survival. However, this cannot be applied to animals like pests, which is why they are called pests, or to necessary instances of where we need animals like breeding animals for sources of food, or for utilizing the animals for testing to ensure successful and effective products. The second is, I think government tries to shoehorn all animal testing into cosmetic products that are used for the improvement of beauty, which is to some extent true, but not recognizing the extensive applications of animal testing in totality. I think Catherine already forwarded enough of evidence and example to show why these are oftentimes used in improving and creating medication in the fastest way possible that are necessary to the improvement of human lives, or necessary to human population as a whole. For example, the vaccinations for pandemics like the COVID-19, which was heavily reliant on a safe testing procedure. But secondly, even if we were to buy that this debate is about cosmetics, it is not only about lipstick or makeup. It's also about cosmetic products that ensures nutrition for individuals who suffer skin problems. It's about individuals who suffer burn marks and require these cosmetic products to improve recovery processes. These are all instances where even within the cosmetic industry, there's a sufficient incentive to improve necessary human conditions. But even in the worst case, I think in my argument later on, I will prove to you why there has been less and less of a reliance to animal testing, or how we make animal testing less painful for animals and we release them into the environment, simply because animal testing has existed since the dawn of time. If we were to regret this motion in entirety, that means government is the side that supports things like theoretical models or computerized predictions, which would never reach the same level of efficacy, safety, or effectiveness of the product when it is used on humanity. Finally, on alternatives, they tell you we have things like human cells or clinical trials. Firstly, we are also the side that has clinical trials. It's just that before we reach clinical trials for excuse me, human beings, we have to have an intermediary process to ensure that this process is safe for human beings, even if they consent. Because scientific processes that are unsafe for human beings, regardless of whether humans consent or not, cannot be utilized unless this pass a specific stage. That's why even though the COVID-19 pandemic was a massive pandemic that harmed the world's economy, we had to wait for these processes to follow the appropriate stages before we reach the vaccine. And that is the principle that regardless of whatever impact is surrounding human populace, we are not willing to give up or trade off. So in their world, they are willing to trade off the risk to human lives to ensure the right to pests to live, without even justifying whether this impact is magnanimous, when Catherine already tells you why there's significant evidence and trend analysis to show why the environment is getting better for these sorts of tests. Secondly, human cells. Human cells is ineffective because of two reasons. The first is they cannot test the reactions to these products in different environments due to the fact that these cells cannot move. And the second is it's not a big enough sample. At best, you can test certain skins from different body parts, but it is not relevant to discuss whether it's effective to different aspects of the body and how it reacts in those instances. So it's still not effective. That is why they don't exist. First, moving on into argumentation, but before that, any points? Okay, great. Incentive to regulate well. I think they assume that all corporations or companies are profit incentivized to the extent in which they are kept in deprivated conditions. But I think it's important to recognize the relevance of animal testing and the necessity of keeping them in a controlled environment. If they are subjected to horrible conditions or substandard environments, it means they are no longer effective measures of control. If they are no longer effective measures of control, then they are no longer effective metrics to discuss whether the product is relevant or effective or not. This is why there's a great care that is handled, or great auditing process to ensure that these tests happen in the most valuable environments to ensure as mitigated harm as possible while ensuring the effectiveness of product. Secondly, let's talk about the advancement of technology that is involved in this process, because I think it's important to recognize that as technology improves, it also improves the lives of these animals that governments wants to defend because of several reasons. The first is improved data banks. So because of the fact that we keep all relevant and necessary data regarding to all forms of testing, there's enough evidence to show what types of chemical compositions will work or not. So the trial and error process becomes increasingly more effective and optimized when we continue this testing to ensure that there's going to be minimal harm to animals, because we won't use chemical compositions in data banks that have proven to be harmful to animals. The second is because of the fact that we are creating better and better technology to devoid certain stages of animal testing, then we only use it in the most necessary instance. For example, cosmetic products that previously required whale blubber to test no longer requires it at all, because of the fact that we have improved on having their computerized model after testing them. And finally, It's also about creating medication that impacts animals as well, because recognizing that there are many instances where animals are subject to diseases like similar to humans, like malaria, cancer, or animal specific diseases. We can utilize this testing to create products that are effective for them. That's why the veterinary industry is becoming more effective and optimized as a result of all of this happening. In conclusion, side opposition regrets all the instances of harm, but these are harms that cannot be avoided in order to ensure continued human survival and effectiveness of these products. This is a trade off that we are happy and willing to make. For those reasons, very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for such a wonderful remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall now call upon the government whips to rebut.
Can you guys hear me? Testing.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. So today, the motion for our today's debate is in light of the short film Save Roth. This House regret the use of animals in scientific research, and I, as the third speaker, will clarify the members of the hall about today's debate, in which who are suggesting to the motion more and who are suggesting less. First thing first, I would like to go move with the deputy of leader of opposition. When first thing first, the first thing he says that we are regretting the casualties too, just like us government. But the thing is, here the DLO are contradicting their leader of opposition, because while your leader of opposition said that no, we shouldn't regret because since we are superior beings compared to them, so we should act like a superior being we are and continue to torture animal mercilessly. That's the contradicting. And then moving on to the his rebuttals, in which he told us about to improve necessary human condition, in which why we are using animals, because we can help to improve diseases such as skin disease, etc., etc. But the thing is, there is also called a method where we use human cells. Why we're using human cells? Because human cells are far more reliable compared to animals. And why we're saying that human cells are far more reliable? Because human cells is cells that are generated by the human too. It is the same cell that the patient will have. While in which, if we are testing when we are testing this method towards the animal, we can expect the same outcome. Because why? Because animals some doesn't have a certain disease like human does. For an example, like my prime minister have said that, which is diseases such as HIV and diseases such as arthritis and so on so on. So that's the reason why we can merely laying on testing on animal, because we there is also diseases that animal doesn't have. So in the end of the day, we still going forward to use human cell, which is similar to the cell that we have for today. And then in his point, he told us about how it is heavily regulated by the government. I mean, he already told this and that, because he already showed us how we can control the auditing process and whatnot. And then the thing is, how heavy does the government regulated it compared to what we have before? Because if it is heavier than before, is there any record? For an example, when government regulated it heavily, there should be some outcome, such as less wastage of animals usage. For an example, if the government were to regulate it strictly, so there should be from 100 of the record should be from 100 of rabbits are died in one experiment. So when it is regulated strictly, it will be only 50 or maybe 70, something like that. So due to the decreasement, so we can judge it is fairly heavily regulated by the government or not, because nowadays the number of animal sacrifice are increasing due to more and more demand because of product introduced to the markets. And then next, moving on to the leader opposition, when leader opposition has told us about the hierarchy, why we are should highlight the hierarchy, because we as a superior organism should benefit from this defenseless animal. She told us about we human, we have the right to control animals life. So what makes we think that we have the right to we have the sole control on animal? They too have the right to not being used in experiment that resulting in nothing. We shouldn't sacrifice them for something that is uncertain. Why I said that something is uncertain, just like what my PM have said, that in about 95 out of 100 drugs, it is efficient when used on animals, but then it is an inefficient use in human. So the thing is, this is will lead to wastage in which we are sacrificing the animal's life for nothing. Now, moving on to the declarations of when, I would like to sum up the cases that have been stated by both of the side. So first thing first is us as the government, we told you about the effectiveness in which the animal testing is close to ineffective, because it is just a first stage of trial. It's not just we are not testing it just on one animal, but a lot. So we also come up with the fact that 95 of the 100 drugs and is efficient towards animals, but efficient for human. And in the end of the day, this will cause wastage, and the animal that we sacrifice will die in vain. In this case, if you are regretting the usage of animals in testing, we can help both human and animals to prevent wastage, such as this case, because the clinical trials and experiments are full of uncertainty. And then, while in their side, they says that it is effective against disease. Why? Because we are torturing countless animals. It doesn't matter that how many we fail, as long as we achieve a goal. Just like what the opposition leader had told us about the try and error process, in which no matter how many times we try, as long as we got the outcome to help human, we should consider to take the method in which her method to consider it is to torture animals. And then next thing is we told you guys the whole about how it is unethical. Because why it is unethical? Because we are sacrificing animals that cannot be, these things is cannot be ethically justified. And then this animal is a defenseless organism. We shouldn't take them lightly to be our toys, because if there's the poor choice regulation, so why can't we protect animal with this kind of more of law and etc. And last thing is we told you guys about demand in which we told you guys about the demand in cosmetic market, because cosmetic industry grows rapidly because of the usage of animal testing, and more product being produced, and then more animal will be sacrificed. With that, I rest my case.
Thank you for such a wonderful speech. It is now time to listen to the rebuttals of opposition with.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Panel, I'm going to start my speech by debunking that there wasn't a contradiction in our case. The speaker before me posited that the reason why there's a contradiction in opposition's case was that on one hand, we say to a large extent we think humans are superior, but we also say that efforts to save animals and the efforts to criminalize very unethical treatments to animals. Panel, why isn't this a contradiction? The point here in this debate was government team was too absolutist in the sense that they wouldn't want to draw a line on where they want to strike a balance between the benefits that we ought to prioritize towards humans and animals to a large extent and the abuses that we can make. Opposition did this by telling you that we, as much as possible, don't condone abuses to a large extent, but in the event there's a moral dilemma in which we ought to prioritize the extensive benefits of this research, we would err on the side of some abuses justified because we prioritize human interests. So we acknowledge the scale in which we respect the efforts, but we draw that line. It is not a contradiction. In my speech, I'm going to resolve two main issues. The first and the main issue is it justified to forsake on principles of ethics against animals for the sake of interest of humans? And secondly, an auxiliary issue on how of the reliability of this research and talking about alternatives. So first, is it justified to have some principles against ethics towards animals for the sake of human interests? Panel posit that all of government's arguments was just premised on the same thing, which is the idea that animals have rights and it's unethical to treat animals through animal testing. And this was illustrated in many different ways in which they portrayed their speeches, like how DPM talked about how you shouldn't have sole control, and Prime Minister talked about how rights should be upheld. But essentially, it means the same thing, that they should not be treated badly, and it's unethical to have any form of animal testing. How did opposition deal with this piece of contention? I think the first response that we made is that it was very absolutist in the sense that they never wanted to consider weighing out or drawing the line as to what extent do they want to save animals, to what extent do they want to save the rights of animals and safeguard their interests when it comes to juxtaposing the benefits of the research that we ought to prioritize. So in that sense, we were the side that told you why we think it's better to draw that line in circumstances in which we feel there is no other alternatives rather than proceeding with this research to get massive amount of benefits that we get to diseases and healthcare, as well as research that we think is so much important. But do we condone abuses to animals to a large extent? We don't. To a large extent, we have a lot of efforts that what government accuses of not having into dealing with animal initiatives. The fact that we have initiatives like, for example, actively calling out to prosecute and ban fur trade, for example, in China, where they literally skin rabbits alive. All those things are things that we actively go against because we think it's very unethical, and we think those are mitigatable and doesn't harm the livelihood of humans, and in fact we think we benefit them by going through these initiatives. The fact that there's evolution towards animal testing, the fact that we have better, stricter procedures into making sure proper medical procedures are taken into making sure animal testers are as less harmful as possible, into making sure, for example, we get more insight to cures to diseases that can help animals as a byproduct of our research. All this shows that we, to some extent, also have efforts into catering towards the livelihood of animals. But this debate is also about a moral dilemma, which is when we draw the line. So in the instance where we feel that the only way we can get proper form of research in the most fastest way possible into dealing with diseases that humans face very imminently and concurrently, we think it's okay to have some form of animal testing. Why? And this is where our principle stands, because we respect that animals don't just exist one-dimensionally. We think living organisms exist in a hierarchy in which we respect beings based on the different level of sentience and their contribution to society. I think the problematic government case on how the idea of animal testing is unethical is very problematic simply because it is absolutist, which means in their side they will also commodify animals as pets. In their side they will also have individuals consuming animals. In their side there also exist norms in which they have things like festivals, like literally in India where we have Jallikattu, where we literally abuse animals. If those things are also justified in the government's bench, we don't see how there's an exclusion to why this animal testing is something that we have to protect so much, and how those things are devoid in that world. Which is why we think we draw the line in circumstances with which we feel there's scientific research that we ought to prioritize because it happens in the fastest way possible. And an evidence to this is the COVID vaccine. Of course, COVID vaccine happened in a very fast rate, like 10 months, as opposed to many other vaccines that took like 6 to 10 years. It's obviously because we also have very good technology. But it's also because of animal testing, which is on the idea that because we have all this byproduct and insight on how it reacts towards animals and pests, we can therefore push all those research and insight that we have towards the 3 clinical stage that we have towards humans. Assuming we don't have all these alternatives, we think if it's harmful towards humans, if there are side effects to humans, you damage public confidence on people towards healthcare policies, for example. You damage public confidence towards efforts in governments that do in order to helping national safety. We think in the event that we can actually prioritize human interest into getting a lot of cures towards diseases, by the way, is things that we ought to prioritize. but also posit that the insight that we get exclusively from animals are one that animals that firstly we protect them from animals that are endangered. For example, we don't take endangered animals as part of our testing. We only take pests that are recognized, for example, like mice and rabbits that are generally a lot of have a lot of collateral damage towards human activities to a large extent. So only these cherry-picked animals that we feel are very biologically similar towards human models, everything is justified for us to do so because the impact it has towards the biodiversity environment isn't so bad because of the large scale of production that they have. Given that all these intricacies are weighed out into choosing those animals, we think that abuse that they talked about towards animal testing isn't so bad that they talked about. We think human benefits ought to be prioritized in debate. There's no other alternatives. Lastly, let's talk about reliability of this research. Their argument is that this research to a large extent isn't reliable. This is premised on the fact that this research ends at where we test on animals, but it isn't. It's a trained process in which we use whatever we learn on these animals and then use it on humans later on when we get the cures towards it. If it fails, it is fine. Scientific research is a continuous process. We can't have biologists researching on diseases if we can't test it on living organisms. We can't have astronomers without researching on stars. So in this instance, living organism that we're willing to trade off is animals. If it's unreliable to some extent, it's a blueprint for future research. All of this shows that opposition wins this debate because we think to a large extent they cannot deny there are no other alternatives that we can have in terms of safeguarding the interests of humans.
Now that we have heard all the three speakers from both teams, now we shall take a short break of 1 minute. During this time, both the government and opposition teams will prepare their reply speech. The time of 1 minute has ended. I shall now invite the second speaker from the opposition team to deliver the reply speech.
Hello, I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
The first thing I want to do in this reply speech is engage with the dichotomy that exists between the two sides. I think the usage of animal testing is not specific to only medical research, like what opposition attempts to prioritizes, or to cosmetics, as much government tries to posit. Because this debate does not rely on what types of industry is more important than the other and whether animal testing is relevant to these industries. The important aspect is the outcome that these industries have and whether animal testing is required to reach this outcome. In the world of medical research, to create safe, effective products that can reach clinical trials and then from there decide whether it can be applied to numerous demographics in different environmental conditions without long or short-term side effects, it requires a preliminary stage of testing it on animals with different demographics in different environments to posit the different short and long-term effects. Are there alternatives in this process? No, there is not. because they tell you that we can use clinical trials because humans are more reliable. But without having this intermediary test, how are we going to know if it will be effective on individuals who consent to clinical trials without knowing whether it's effective and safe? The reason why we have individuals that consent to clinical trials is for two reasons. The first is that they are desperate, but they are not desperate enough to jeopardize their life if they are not certain that the product has a possibility of succeeding. This is why it's important to first have that data to show that there is a possibility of surviving and that there is a possibility of this medication being successful. In the cosmetic industry, while the outcome isn't as necessary as medical research, it is still an outcome that individuals want, demand, and deem to be necessary. The cosmetic industry has billions of dollars of investment every year, and as time progresses, we see that cosmetic products are there to resolve many problems that are beyond superficial. Individuals who suffer burn marks, nutrition of skin, and so many others. The ultimate fact of this is this: yes, chemical substances that are utilized on the skin is extremely dangerous if not tested properly. Bottom line is that these outcomes of this research oftentimes leads to better and safer products, which goes nicely into my second issue, whether they are reliable. Because another contest that government makes is because the physiology of humans and animals are not the same. The fact that animals don't suffer the same diseases, or the fact that there are many times in which there are errors that result in deaths of animals which cannot be applied to humans. First things, this is unfair because it scrutinizes one part of the process in a chain of a process to create a safe product. The industry of creating a product that can be consumed or be put on skin is one that is arduous and requires a lot of stages. Yes, there may result in a lot of error in this process of animal testing, but it oftentimes leads to knowing what chemical composition will work to be consumed by humans. And if this process takes a bit of time, it means that this time is the one that is the most optimized. In the world of government, you have to rely on predictions, computerized models that cannot account for environmental, demographical, or entire human physiological change that can continuously exist. And this is why it means that it is unsafe. And the final response to arguments is we are the side that attempts to protect animals the most for two reasons. The first is the continuous progress means that this trial and error process becomes shorter because we have data to know what types of composition works. And the second is we know what types of medication can be used to ail animal specific diseases. Ultimately, opposition is the side that proves to you that while it is true animals' rights are important, the fact that this process is necessary means that it is one that we can trade off. Government has yet to show why this is so important that it can trade off all the benefits that opposition claims. For those reasons, very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank you for that speech. I should now call upon the Prime Minister from the government team to deliver their reply speech.
Test.
Yes, we can.
Ladies and gentlemen, in this precious minute, I will present to you why this motion should be accepted, and let's take a look over the argument that have been presented by both opposition and government. We move at the opposition first, where I think we can summarize their moral ground today. If the outcome has more benefit than disadvantages, then we must do anything to get it. We must do anything to solve it, even though it will take so much casualty, even though it will take about 100 million life of animal every year. So where do I find the same logic? The same logic I can find in the USA-Iraq war, Mr. Speaker. Because of what? The US waged war with Iraq with the one sole goal to make Saddam Hussein get out from his government without they are not They are not care about how many casualties, about how many million Iraqis got bombed. In the end of the day, they want only to know that Saddam Hussein is no longer the head of government in the Iraq. This is what we call as a morality that should not be presented as a human. When we have a mind, when we can think for the best and benefit for everyone, why must we sacrifice one of the life thing rather than other, Mr. Speaker? That's why we say it. We as a government today, we regret that we have to use testing on the animal research. So what way can we do? We treasure this life of the animal and we must search for another alternative we must search for other alternative rather than using animal in the scientific research. Let's take a look at the argument of the opposition. They say this is human privilege, human hierarchy to exploit rabbit and animal for the scientific research. So I think this is a self-conscious argument. Because of what? Because of we regard we are higher than animal, then we think that we have a higher right or have a privilege to exploit animal. That's the first one. Secondly, they say about they value human life over an animal life. So they say we must extend the human life as much as we can, even though the animal have to be tested and die. So we can see how ironic it is when you want to extend one of the living microorganism, one living organism, and you must kill another organism in order for you to justify your greediness to living health and well when you kill and shorten other living thing life. Thirdly, they say about the environment getting better, where we have the incentive to put this animal in the controlled environment. So I say this is because we put them in the controlled environment because we directly benefit from the controlled environment itself. Not because we care about the animal life, but because there will be a better outcome from the controlled environment, then we put them in the controlled environment. If the controlled environment has no any relationship between the better outcome, then the opposition will not put the animal in the controlled environment. So let's take a look at the government today. We have said to you that we regret of the use of animal in the scientific research. Why? First, we talk about the ineffectiveness. We said not everything is effective on animal. It's also effective on the human. So we say we should not waste any resource for trial and error. We should not waste any life to justify our greediness. That first. Secondly, we say about the unethical use of animal because we know animal cannot protect themselves. So who can protect themselves? We that have mind, we that can think about what is the best for us and them to continue to cooperate. And thirdly, about the market demand, how we can see the market inflated and 100 million killed every year to satisfy demand of the customer cosmetic. So I think we should regret the use of animal testing. I raise my case.
Thank you. So now we have come to the end of the debate. But before that, debaters are asked to remain in this room while waiting for the adjudicators to make a decision. Adjudicators are reminded to move to the adjudicators discussion room in the Cisco WebEx via the link provided.
Just asking, where's the link given for the adjudication for the adjudicator room?
Oh, it should be given before by the technical team, but I will ask them.
Okay, or I may have missed it.
No, I think you're supposed to reconnect back to the
The
WebEx,
general
and then they'll
meeting just
assign you a
now.
breakout room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the general meeting just now. So you just go in and then to the breakout room. Or you can refer back to the WhatsApp group for the link of the general meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Is everyone here?
Eh,
Okay. Is everyone else here? I see Catherine's here.
Yeah, I'll call the others, but they should be here.
Okay.
We're here.
Okay. Cool. So I'm gonna give the result. Then I'll give some general points about the debate, and then I'll explain why the decision went as such. And then give some general feedback, as well as I think some constructive as well. So the debate was the decision was unanimous. We gave the debate to in opposition. I think the fairly the general consensus among the adjudicators, I mean, after we submitted all the ballots and we had the discussion afterwards, was that I think Op was a lot more able to really elaborate on their principles and their arguments better than Gov was. Even though Gov was asserting that certain things are unethical and that it is wrong for us to exploit animals or to sacrifice animals for human interest, there wasn't as much a logical reasoning as to why it is so wrong for that to really happen. I think Op was able to at least, even though it was quite sparse, I think there's still some analysis about this idea of a hierarchy and this idea that there's a reason for why we use certain animals, like why we use pests versus not using certain animals as well, why we don't use endangered animals. Like there's a lot more elaboration as to why this is so. I think Prop or Gov suffered from that in the sense that a lot of it seemed quite assertive at times, like that it's unethical for us to do so. And I think that's one. But two, I don't think there was as much response to the reasoning behind Op's idea of this hierarchy, whether or not this hierarchy was even logical. And I think that made it a lot harder. I think Prop wasn't as responsive to Op's arguments as much as Op was responsive to Gov's arguments. Now, I think there was some assertion of whether or not there is a contradiction. Now, regardless of whether or not like Op Whip responded to that, or I think one thing I should point out is that contradictions are not in and of themselves like prove that someone's case is wrong. I think at some point you will encounter contradictions on the other team. And I think the burden sometimes is on the team that is asserting the contradiction to show why that contradiction means that that case doesn't stand. And I think there needs to be some elaboration as well. And I don't think that really, like, whether or not there was a contradiction is one thing, but the secondly is like there wasn't enough elaboration as to why that contradiction makes Op's case quite not tenable or tenuous at best. And that's broadly the reason why Op took it over Prop. Now, one thing I would point out in terms of constructive, and this is something that applies to both teams, is I think both teams need to recognize that the paradigm that so we judge this debate based on the debate that happened, but I would just point out that in any debate that talks about this house regrets, there is usually some kind of burden for a team to talk about like yes, there are benefits, yes, there are harms, but why do we regret the paradigm and everything that's happened as a result of this paradigm of animal testing, etc. Of course, no one wanted to talk about the film as much, and to be honest, like I'm not sure how many of us have even watched the short film, so it was a bit of a weird motion in that sense. But what I would say is that whenever there's a debate about this house regrets, and this is something that I would offer as constructive for both first speakers, is both first speakers probably needed to set probably a benchmark for how we should judge this debate, right? And if this doesn't happen in first speaker, this needs to happen at least by the end of the debate. And it made it a lot harder sometimes to be able to give credit because one, teams were not weighing arguments as to why this, like teams were running arguments and they were rebutting each other, but no one was really weighing like why this particular argument is important. And people were saying, oh yeah, this principle and that principle. And I'm like, I, as a judge, cannot step in and say principles beat practical impacts or practical impacts beat principles, right? You as debaters should tell us why we should value certain arguments more than others. And I think that didn't happen. Two, I don't think the judges were told how we should judge this debate in terms of like contribution. So, and this is like constructive more towards replies as well. I think the replies in this debate were more used as rebuttal speeches to respond to things that were said by the other teams, rather than really clarifying what were the burdens of this debate, what your team did well compared to the other team, and even what the other team did well and why that particular like even if the other team did certain things well, why that shouldn't matter compared to what you did as well. So what I would say is reply is usually your last opportunity to really weigh why certain arguments or why certain parts of that case are less meaningful compared to yours and what you did well as well. And I think both reply speakers kind of wanted to make this more rebuttally rather than trying to make a concerted effort to like adjudicate the debate in a biased way to show why we should judge. So like the replies were not particularly good in that sense. They sounded more rebuttally, which is like not really the purpose of a reply speech, but also it didn't add much value as to how we should, like, it didn't help the judges to arrive to the decision they arrived at the end. All right, do you have any questions?
No, thank you, Mektep. Appreciate it.
Okay, welcome.
Mr. Adjudicators, can you please announce the best speaker for this debate?
Oh, okay. Is that a thing? Chairperson, organizer?
Yes, that is a thing.
That is a thing? Okay, well, we did agree beforehand that it was op.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay, congrats Opwave and congrats Op.
Okay.
All right, so with that, this house can conclude that in the light of the short film Save Ralph, this house does not regret the use of animals in scientific research. With that, this House of Parliament is adjourned. Thank you. So thank you everyone for attending this.
Thank you.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Thank you very much.
So see you
Congrats.
in the next
Thanks,
round.
organizers.
Good luck. Good luck for the
Tomorrow.
next round.
Just to
Congrats
clarify,
again.
tomorrow is so thank you. Congrats to you guys too. Tomorrow around 7:45, right?
Yes,
Okay. Thank you.
you should be in the quarantine room by 7:45. It's a bit early, but yeah.
No worries.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good luck everyone for tomorrow.
All right, see you guys tomorrow.
Good luck.